demonstration, we will go over the install process of DHCP Server in Windows Server 2022. This will allow our clients to obtain IP addresses automatically when connected to the network. On your Windows Server, open the Server Manager. From the top right-hand corner, open the Manage drop-down menu and select Add Roles and Features. And in here, we're going to click Next. And we're going to keep it as role-based or feature-based installation and click Next. Make sure your server is selected and you can see that on this screen and click Next. And under the roles, we're going to select the option called DHCP Server, this one. And we're going to check that thing off. And it'll give you a pop-up to add additional tools. And we're going to say Add Feature. So make sure you add those additional tools. And we're going to click Next. Next, Next, and in here we're going to select Restart the destination server automatically if required. If you are in a production environment, make sure that doesn't disrupt anything. So for me, it is a lab environment, so I'm going to select that option. And for the warning, I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to click Install. Depending on your server configuration, this may take few seconds to few minutes. Once the installation process has been completed, before closing this window, we will click on this link called Complete DHCP Configuration. When you do that, it will open up the console for DHCP post-install configuration wizard. And what we're going to do, we're going to click Next. And you're going to ask what kind of credentials we are going to use for creating this DHCP server in our Active Directory domain services. So I'm going to use the administrator account and I'm going to click down here, Commit button. And when you do that, it will give you a confirmation message that creating security groups is done and authorization of the DHCP server is done. If you get any of these things with the error messages, you have to go back and make sure that you fix those. And once it is done, we're going to click Close and we can close this Add Roles and Feature console as well. Now, if you go to the Tools menu, you will have an additional feature, actually two features, one called the DHCP and the other one is a DNS. So these are the two things that added as a result of installing DHCP role as well as the associated features. So the DNS is part of the DHCP associated roles. So let's open our DHCP role and it will open the DHCP console and it will look like something like this. So right now we have the ssserv 2022.sanuja.local. That is our server and we know it is our server because if you go to our server manager, go to local server, and if you put this thing side by side, the DHCP, you can see the ssserv 2022 is our server name and sanuja.local is our domain name. So that's why we have that showing up here. So we have two options, one called the IPv4 and the other one is called the IPv6. I'm not interested in the IPv6 right now because we will be focusing on IPv4 for now. So on here, what we will do, we need to select the IPv4 on the DHCP console, right click and select the option called New Scope. So the scope is basically a pool of DHCP IP addresses that can be assigned automatically when a client gets connected to this network. So scope define how those pools can be obtained and created and what IP addresses should be handed out and what IP addresses should be outside the scope or reserve IP addresses. So those are basically IP addresses that are maybe static IP addresses that you will be assigning to your servers and other static devices such as printers, etc. So you don't want those IP addresses to be handed out and we can define all of that using the scope. So basically we're going to select the IPv4, right click, click New Scope. And it'll get you this wizard. And in here we're going to click Next. And you can name the scope anything you like. I'm going to call it Net IT Geeks. and then on the description I'll say net, you can say whatever you like, so I'm going to call it net IT geeks internal DHCP, and I'm going to click next. And in here we are going to tell the scope what IP addresses it can use. So that is the range of IP addresses that it is allowed to hand out. So I'm going to say 192.168.1, and I'm going to start from 100. The reason for that is because I'm going to use the first 90 some addresses, 98 and addresses for static IP addresses. And for end address, I'm going to do 192.168.1. Let's put 200. It doesn't really matter as long as it is within the subnet mask, because we are using 255.255.255.0 is /24. So I'm going to use from 100 to 200 for my DHCP IP addresses. So anything outside of this scope, I can use for static IP assigning for my servers or clients where we need to use static IP addresses. And then I'm going to click next. And in here, they're saying, hey, if you want to exclude IP addresses within that range that you have actually defined previously, for if you want to exclude something within this range, you can add exclusion IP addresses in here as well. So I don't need to exclude anything within that range because I have already started the IP address pool a little bit behind, right? Because we are starting the pool from 100. I don't need to put any exclusions in here. So we're going to click next. You can define the lease duration. I'm going to leave it as default at 8 days, but you can change this to whatever the days you like or hours. I don't recommend changing this to a very low number. For example, don't put it into that just 15 minutes, 20 minutes, for example, because that's going to generate a lot of DHCP packets. That is not good for your network. It could overburden your network. So I'm just going to leave it as 8 days as default, but you can change it according to your needs and requirements of your organization. But again, keep in mind, making this duration, the lease duration smaller, mean that they're going to have more network traffic within your network. So keep that in mind when you're setting this thing up. And I'm going to click next. And then they're going to ask, do you want us to configure the DHCP options? Like, do you want to configure DHCP option scope right now? I'm going to select yes, because this will go through the process automatically and I don't need to do it later. So I'm going to select yes, which is a default option, and I'm going to click next. And it's going to ask, what is the default gateway? You can specify the router or default gateway to be distributed by the scope, and you can add what default gateway you want to add in here. And I'm going to leave it blank, and I'm going to click next. The reason I left it blank because the default gateway is going to be this server itself. That's why. You can add your server itself. So for example, this server is basically 192.168.1.3. So I can use the default gateway 192.168.1.3. Actually, I recommend you adding it. So just add your own server. So what that's going to do, the default gateway will be put to this server 192.168.1.3. So yeah, just add to just add your server, so that will make sure that it will be the default gateway for all your devices, so that will be reaching this server. I'm going to click next, and they're going to ask what the parent domain going to be. So the domain going to be sanuja.local, and it is already should be in here added, but if it is not there, you can actually go sanuja.local, and I can say resolve, and it's going to say 192.168.1.3. Why? Because that is the LAN segment internal server, because this is assigned by DHCP, this is internal, and so that's the one we need to add. So if it is not already here, so in my situation, my server IP address 192.168.1.3 is not there, you can automatically add it by just entering your domain name, and it will automatically add that. Where does this number come from? This is basically because I have two IP addresses here, because one is that statically assigned 192.168.1.3, which is the internal network, and I have an external IP address that is assigned by the DHCP, and that is where the second number is coming from. So you might have two of these, and when you click on these, you can see that one of them say up or down. So you can click, you can move them up or you can move them down. The reason for that is this is basically telling the server, the DHCP server, which one should have the priority. So right now I'm telling the priority should be given to 192.168.1.3, and that will take precedence. Or you can simply go in here and you can remove this other one. So you can actually just click remove, and that will remove that one as well. So I'm not going to remove it, but you have the ability to remove that. So I'm going to keep both of them. This is because I have two network interface cards and I want to use the internal one. So that's why I resolve my domain name so that it will have the internal IP address. I'm going to click next. And in here, we're going to ask for Win server. I don't have anything. So I have the other one, the other network IP address showing up here. So I'm going to go sanuja.local. And I'm going to say resolve. I'm going to add it and I'm going to move that thing up. So that is the internal IP address of this server, as I mentioned before. And I'm going to click next. And then you're going to have, do you want to activate the scope now? Before I do that, I'm going to go back one more step. If you don't have two network cards, you only going to have one. It will actually resolve automatically here your local IP is your domain IP address, because I have two, one external, one internal. That's why I had to add this and I had to move those things up to give priority to internal IP address. But as I mentioned, you don't need to do this if you only have one network card. Typically, most Windows servers, you will be having more than one network card. So I'm going to click next and you're going to say, do you want to activate that? Yes, I do. So I'm going to click next and click finish. So now I have created a scope in which we have an address pool of 100 to 200. So 192.168.1.100 to 192.168.1.200 will be assigned automatically when a client requests a DHCP IP address. And under reservations, I don't have anything reserve under that pool, because all the reserve or static IP addresses will be outside of this pool. So I don't have to worry about reserve IP addresses. Under address leases here, anytime a client obtain an IP address, that client will appear here. So that means anytime a device obtain an IP address from this DHCP pool, it will show up here whether it's domain join or not. So keep that in mind. You don't need to have a domain join in order for the device to obtain an IP address. So you might ask why that is, right? Well, isn't that a problem? No, it's not, because this particular feature can be used for network boot, where you have a brand new device that is not domain joined that require an IP address. They will still get an IP address even though they are not part of the ADDS domain. So keep that in mind. Even though these DHCP features are connected to the our domain, you don't need to have a device domain joined to obtain a lease IP address from this pool. So let's go and test that. So I'm going to go to my Windows 11 machine. And if I go to my control panel, and if I go into our network and sharing center, and I can go to my internal network, and you can see currently it has some IP addresses. But if you go to properties and we select the IPv4 version and click properties of that one, we can see currently the 192.168.1.16 is statically assigned with the static information. So I'm going to select that, turn that into obtain an IP address automatically. And for the DNS, I can either leave it as the default DNS, or we can also switch it to the obtain a DNS server address automatically, and we can click OK and close. So what that basically going to do, it is now instead of having static IP address, it has a DHCP IP address, and that will be resolved from this DHCP server running here. And if I refresh the IP address leases, and if I press this refresh button, we see that my Win11 ENTX64WS3 is showing up here, and it has an IP address of 192.168.1.100 that is assigned by our scope. So in other words, this Windows 11 device have obtained an IP address through the DHCP server we just configured. And if I go back to my Windows 11 machine, and in here, if you go to the start menu and type cmd for command prompt and type ipconfig/all and then press enter, it'll give you all the information related to your network adapters. So I have two network adapters direct to the internet and the internal. So the internal one is the one that is connected to this DHCP server. And if you look at that, you will see that you have the DHCP server enabled right here. And it has obtained an IP address of 192.168.1.100. And if you go back again to the Windows Server 2022, we can confirm that the IP address 192.168.1.100 is being leased out to that particular client. And you can also see that it has also obtained the DHCP server IP address right here, which is showing as 192.168.1.3, which is the IP address of our Windows Server. Because if you go to our Windows Server right here with the DHCP enable, DHCP server install, you can see that it is 192.168.1.3 right here. So that is basically the one that is the DHCP server as well as our DNS server. So that's how you can configure a Windows Server 2022 machine with the DHCP server. This is the same process for previous version of Windows servers. So you can go through the same process to install your DHCP server using these steps. If you have any questions or concerns regarding any of the topics we have covered today, you are more than welcome to reach out to me. If you like these type of technical videos and demonstrations, please make sure to thumbs up my video and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, thank you so much and have a nice day.